drowning is, there are hundreds of thousands of cases of drowning in the U.S. every year. Most of them occur in freshwater, rivers, lakes, rarely, well, not rarely, maybe 10% in saltwater, but the vast majority occur in freshwater. The thing about drowning is that it's not how you see it on TV. On TV, it's depicted as a lot of thrashing and flailing. It actually doesn't, it happens very briefly. Once you are submerged, you quickly, that stops. And drowning is defined essentially as the inability of, or being submerged or immersed in a fluid where you cannot keep your mouth and nose above the fluid line. Once that happens, then drowning is a very quiet, silent death. Because you can't yell out, you know, all this stuff, yeah. As soon as you go below the surface, it's quiet. So, and most drownings do not end or do not occur by the lungs filling up with fluid. The body reflexively, once fluid enters the back of the throat, will reflexively produce laryngospasm. So you can't yell for two reasons. One is because your larynx is clamped down, and two is because you're in a non-conducting medium. It's only after your larynx relaxes that some fluid can usually enter the airways. So if you're dead before you enter the water, then your lungs will fill up with fluid. But if you're alive in entering the water, they won't. So in terms of forensics, that's one thing they look for, the amount of water in the lungs. Most drownings, most drownings are related to drugs and alcohol, stupidity, accidents. Dry drowning is a term that was used for a while because there's so little water in the lungs, but that's actually not a term that's ever used anymore, especially in medicine. It's not. It's either drowning, near drowning, with sequelae, like damage to something, or a near drowning without sequelae. Those are the three levels of drowning now. The sequence after submersion, the consciousness period lasts anywhere from about 15 to 60 seconds once you go underwater. So you lose consciousness after that. Death will occur over a period of minutes, but you're not conscious to be aware of that. Now, the death, it says longer if cold water. I'll go into it more in just a little bit, but you can stay submerged for over an hour in certain circumstances and come out without any sequelae. Near drowning without sequelae. And I'll talk about that in a second. We've all read about it in the newspapers, no doubt. The sequence is here, and it's pretty intuitive how that's going to work. The fluid aspiration here is, again, as I say, minimal. So in cold water, you have to deal with hypothermia, death due to hypothermia versus drowning, versus the combination of the two. In cold water, especially in northern United States in the wintertime, little kids in particular, falling through the ice. Once your face hits the cold water, your body will reflexively shut down. That's the mammalian diving reflex. And these kids can stay underwater for an hour or two, and then once they're pulled out of the water and re-warmed, they can, just like nothing ever happened. The older you are, though, the less effective the mammalian diving reflex is in protecting you. Okay? If you have a child, an infant coming in with SVT, supraventricular tachycardia, one of the treatment for supraventricular tachycardia, the initial treatment, is stimulation of the parasympathetics. And you can do that in infants by taking an ice pack, like a musculoskeletal ice pack that you'd have in the freezer, and putting it on their glabella, which is right here, obviously. And that stimulates the mammalian diving reflex and can convert them from SVT. You can also do it in adults by sticking their face in a bucket of ice water, but it's less effective in adults as it is in infants. Okay? Freshwater, saltwater, in terms of the effect here, hypo versus hypertonic, hemodilution and hemolysis versus hemoconcentration. The bottom line is it really doesn't matter. The physiologic response to drowning in salt or fresh water is pretty much, the end game is the same. So, events preceding drowning, 1/4 of drowning are related to alcohol or drugs. One of the issues is, it's just like flying. You lose awareness of what's up, because in water, you're weightless. So you lose consciousness or awareness of which direction do I go. Interestingly, I was trying to tell Vanetta this, and I'm not sure why it works, but in diving, in scuba diving, I just love to go up over these coral heads and go down on the back side, upside down. So you're coming down, 20, 30 feet upside down, but you don't feel any rush. You don't feel, it's not like you stand on your head. You don't feel that. You don't get any sensation of that. It's like you were weightless, right? So that's the same thing that happens here. You don't know where up is. Okay. Extreme fatigue, illness related like MI, seizure activity, this is quite common. Stupidity plays a big role in Oklahoma. People who jump in to help save somebody and they themselves can't swim. There was an incident down at Eufaula this summer. We were down there and we were riding around in a boat, and there was all of a sudden all these the ambulances and everybody else was up at the campground, and some guy without a life jacket who couldn't swim fell off a wave runner, and he surfaced a few times and then went under, and just stupid. That's a senseless tragedy right there. Sting by an aquatic animal like a jellyfish or something. And then the last thing here, intentional hyperventilation, they call it a shallow water blackout. People try to hyperoxygenate their, and then they jump in the pool and they pass out and die. Don't do that. Don't do that. Near drowning is with sequelae here. They come out, they're walking around, they're talking, they're happy, but then because of aspiration, they can develop types of pulmonary edema. When you hear the words pink frothy sputum, then the answer is always pulmonary edema. Pink frothy sputum. Pink because the alveolar capillaries have broken down and you have micro hemorrhages and it's pink and frothy. There you go. Lab findings on drowning and near drowning. The one thing, let me caution you about this, and it applies to drowning and electrocution, is that the chest x-ray or the EKG will lag the event. So if somebody has a near drowning experience, you hospitalize them and monitor them at least overnight, or if they've been shocked, the same thing. You hospitalize them and monitor them overnight. Airway, that's the big thing, and obviously making sure that when you pull somebody from a drowning situation, they go straight to a spine board with a C-collar. Make sure that you stabilize that C-spine, because that too would be a fracture above C4 would be a reason for respiratory arrest and drowning. So you're not dead because of the mammalian diving reflex. You're not dead until you're warm and dead. So if somebody comes in and they are clinically dead to you, they have no pulse, pupils are fixed, dilated, and their core body temperature is at 92, you rewarm them to 98 before you call them dead. There was I don't know if I told you about this back in anatomy, about PEA, about the PA that the guy had been in a rollover accident, and so he came to because he warmed up. Well, that's why you're not dead until you warm up. Okay? And hospitalize everybody with a near drowning experience. Okay, so when you get to the phylogenetic scale, at the bottom of the phylogenetic scale, just before you get to single-cell organisms, there's a stinking-ass cat. And then above cats, you have things like snakes and spiders and stinging things. But keep in mind that cats are at the bottom. All right? So that's probably a board question. There are two broad categories of snakes. There are the crotalids and the elapids. We don't have the elapids here in Oklahoma, but you do down in the Gulf states, you do in the eastern seaboard in particular, namely coral snakes. They favor water more marine related states. We don't have a lot of cobras around, but you have a lot of dumbasses that have cobras in their house. So I put the elapids on here because some idiot is going to have a pet cobra in this state. Probably one of you. I don't know. If I had to take I'd say Zane. Okay. The three snakes we do have here, though, the crotalids are all three listed there. A lot of crotalid bites are dry bites. They bite, but they don't inject venom. You don't get an envenomation. But you don't know. You will never know. You have to treat them all as envenomations. One thing you don't do with envenomation is put heat or cold on it. You don't put temperature on it, like you would think. If you have a red inflamed area, you would think, well, I need to put a cold compress on that. Don't do it. It only makes it worse. The reason these snakes are in different classifications has to do, one of the reasons has to do with the effect of their venom. The crotalids are more enzymatic digesters of red blood cells in a tissue. The elapids are more neuromuscular related, mostly neurologic related in how they act. The anticoagulant effect of these crotalid venom results in the dispersal of the venom more readily than if it didn't have that anticoagulant effect. Crotalids are all called pit vipers because they have a triangular head, and in the front of their eyes they have a pit. If you look at a Google image, you can see this pit in the front of their eyes. This is how their toxin works. When somebody comes in with a snake bite, if it's a poisonous snake, the wound will typically be a couple of puncture wounds like that. If it's a non-poisonous snake, the wound will be usually more like that. So it's unfortunately, unless they bring the snake to you, and they will oftentimes bring the snake. Usually the snake, most of the time the snake will be really dead because of revenge killing. But they will oftentimes bring a live snake or live spiders or live animals to you. So keep in mind that the action of the head, the biting action of the snake, can go on for quite some time, even after it's been decapitated. So don't reach in there and grab it with your hands. The other thing is, when you talk about bee stings, once a stinger goes in, and for cases of honeybees, they pull it out and leave the stinger in, you can see the sac pulsating on the stinger. So these things are physiologic responses, so don't reach in there with your hands. Coral snakes are identified by their banding pattern. It says red on yellow, kill a fellow, red on black, venom lack. This is a coral snake here. Very similar. These are small snakes. They're little bitty snakes, but they're very similar in appearance to the non-venomous scarlet king snake. These rattlesnakes are all over this state. Copperheads are all over the state, in forest, woods. Moccasins tend to favor water edges. So, I mean, if you're a snake, to me, you're considered poisonous until the results of the shotgun blast wear off. Then you're just considered dead.
Can I add something?
What's that?
I learned practicing in ER in Pawhuska that I did not know. They have pygmy rattlers, which are a smaller form of rattlesnake bite, or rattlesnake. And their envenomation is a lot stronger than the regular sized rattler, as well as the fact that the action of that envenomation, even after the patient has been admitted and treated completely with the antivenom, they can have up to 6 to 8 months later a reenaction of that event, just like they got bit again. And I did not know that until I had experience working in Pawhuska. They just have a very high rate of this there.
Snake bites are really common in the state, in the parks and in people who are cleaning out their garages. The cool concrete floor, especially in the summertime. They have a tendency to get up underneath the lawnmower and in areas like that, so watch where you put your hands. The signs and symptoms of snake bites, initially, it can be none. If you get to the ellipids, you start developing these neurologic symptoms pretty soon. You get paresthesias, and then progress from there. You may want with ventilator support. You probably need to be in the ICU if you're developing focal neurologic signs. In terms of crotalids, there's a stuff called Crofab. It's an anti-venom. It comes in units. So it is an immunoglobulin against the venom. So what you do is you give somebody a certain number of units of Crofab, and if their symptoms are getting worse, you give them more units of Crofab. The problem with Crofab, it can produce an allergic reaction to you and can produce anaphylaxis. So you have to really watch out how you're using anti-venom. Okay? Most hospitals will have anti-venom on board, even rural hospitals. If they don't, they can go to the next town and get it. So it's widely used. You have to, though, make a decision on whether or not to use it, because, again, it does have side effect potentials. It can be lethal. So if your bite is not that bad, if the destruction is not that bad, they might just keep you in the hospital and let you ride it out. Okay? You don't always use antivenom on a snake bite. I would probably get a hospitalist to make that call, though. I wouldn't be making that call myself. I transport out how many people from Blackwell and Sulphur to the city. They need to be dealt with here, not there. Okay. Whether or not you extract the venom, they used to have a thing. A snake bite kit used to have a little suction cup, so if you were bitten, you put the suction cup on your skin to theoretically try to draw the venom out. Or you always hear, you cut it and you get your friend to suck out the venom. Don't do that. Don't do that. What you should do is immobilize the limb below the heart and get yourself to the nearest ER. Don't put a tourniquet on the limb or over the site itself. Okay. You can use an ACE wrap to control some of the swelling, but that's as far as it goes. And the swelling here can be quite pronounced. If the swelling gets so bad that you start seeing the filtrate of plasma coming through the skin, you start seeing the clear serum coming through the skin. There's a technique called a Z-plasty, where you go, it's just like a fasciotomy, but it's of the skin. You go in with a scalpel in the OR, and you make a cut into the subcutaneous tissue in like a Z, a zigzag, to relieve the pressure, because you don't want to wind up with a compartment syndrome from this swelling. I remember when I was a student, there was a kid that got bitten by a rattlesnake in his garage, as a matter of fact. And so after we used Crofab on him, but his hand swelled like that. I mean, it was huge. And so he was lying in bed, so we put his hand up. And so the next day we went, on rounds, and all this fluid had drained out of his, his elbow was this big. And then you put his arm up, and then the next day he had this big cantaloupe in his armpit it's just the edema going down to gravity all at once. Okay. Bees and wasps are all in the Hymenoptera group. There are all sorts of different bees and wasps. We have all of them here in Oklahoma. The sensitivity to these things varies among people, from a minor inconvenience to full-blown anaphylactic reaction. Fire ants are here in Oklahoma. They're all over the place in Oklahoma. They have a stinger. The way they work is these are the different Hymenoptera. The way fire ants work is they take their big jaws and they clamp onto your skin, and then they take the stinger back here and they sting you multiple times in sort of a semicircle as they go around where they're latched on with their mouth. They usually raise a painful vesicle, 1 or 2 millimeters. Some people are very sensitive to fire ants, others are just not so much so. I remember one time I was stuck my foot, and we were picking blackberries, and I stuck my foot into the bush as I was getting the blackberries, and all of a sudden it's like, ow, crap. And I was stung, I don't know, maybe about 20, 30 times on my foot. And the next day, it was like I was walking on a pillow. My foot was so swollen. It was the coolest looking thing. I mean, I had all these little vesicles, but they weren't infected or anything, but my foot was literally, from top to bottom, was probably that thick. It was too cool. If you want to see some wasp, if you go out the second story door up there under the physician associate program, if you just look to your left, there's a wasp nest right here. They're excellent. Got about 8 to 10 members on it. You can take a look there if you want. Honeybees, they sting one time, and then when they move away from you, the stinger rips out of the back of the abdomen. The honeybee will go off and die, but the stinger stays in you. All these wasps, they can sting multiple times. One of the first things you want to do with a bee sting is you want to get the stinger out of you in whatever way you can. Scrape it out or pluck it out. You want to try to get the stinger out because it's going to sit there and pump more venom into you. The different diagnoses here are usually obvious. The symptoms that present are person-specific. As they get more and more severe, you start seeing anaphylaxis, and obviously the way you treat anaphylaxis, we'll go over that. Why would it be more severe if a person's on metoprolol? Why would the reaction be more severe if they're on metoprolol? What's the treatment for anaphylaxis?
Epinephrine.
What is metoprolol doing? It's blocking the effects of epinephrine. Okay, it's a beta blocker. All right, so, which is obviously one of the first things you do here. We talked about this yesterday. Unseasoned meat tenderizer, and using that like, what do you call that stuff? Adolph's meat tenderizer. The meat tenderizer, the active ingredient is called papain. It's an enzyme that breaks down proteins. The venom is a protein, so if you put a meat tenderizer on there, it might help. The problem is the venom is inside you. It's not on the surface. So unless you can get the meat tenderizer in you, it's probably not going to do a whole lot of good. Same as things like people will use tobacco. They'll take the tobacco from a cigarette, or they'll snuff or whatever and put on there. That's. They also have a put baking soda on there because the bee stings. One of the elements of this is formic acid. That's not the toxin, but it is an acidic solution. So if you put baking soda on there, you're theoretically neutralizing the acid, turning it into a salt. But again, the venom is on the inside, so it's really not going to help you very much. In rural Oklahoma, there was a time, probably about 10 years ago, where, those, not a taser, but it had the two little points, I can't remember what they're called, two little points on it that would shock you. you know, this sort of self-defense thing. Wasn't a taser, what were those things called?
Stun gun?
A stun gun, had the two little, the two little pins on it that, you know, you would put them on somebody and pull the trigger and it would deliver a shock and you're incapacitated. Well, there was a group that believed that one way to denature the protein would be to apply electricity to it. So they would bee stings. Have you?
I've heard of people, yes.
Yeah.
I know people.
Yeah, you know people. So they put this thing in and they hit them with a stun gun, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Because other than, the stun gun works. It doesn't work at relieving that. Yeah, anybody knows Robert Lynch, he's a PA, works in an emergency room down in, he used to work in Hewlton, down around Ardmore. He called me one day, oh, I got this great thing for treating stings and bites is, you know, stun guns. Yeah, no, it doesn't work. Okay, spider bites, also, they would use on spider bites too. Speaking of spiders, the two spiders that you really have to worry about in this state are black widows and brown recluse spiders. Black widows, if you're going to get bit by a spider, you want to be bitten by a black widow. The males, they're not a threat. It's the females that are the bad actors here. They have an hourglass on their abdomen, so that's one of the ways to view them. They're about the size of a dime to a quarter. They're not very big. The bite is a neurotoxic venom, but it usually is not very potent and it doesn't disseminate very much. Some people will have more severe forms, more symptoms, but most of the time the symptoms of a black widow bite are pretty mild. Okay. The times where it does cause a problem, though, are in the very young, the very old, and those with significant cardiovascular disease. I would not admit somebody to the hospital with a black widow bite, just to bite themselves, if they did not have some other type of symptom related to it. The treatment for there is no treatment for a black widow bite. There's a commercial antivenom that nobody is going to have. You just kind of ride this one out. If they're having significant symptoms, then put them in a hospital overnight, take care of those symptoms, treat them symptomatically. This dude, though, is the bad one. This is a brown recluse with a fiddleback. You can see the fiddleback right here. You see that little thing right there? That's the fiddle. It's very small, and unless you have good eyes, you're not going to be able to see it. They're really small spiders. They have a small body, and they have very thin legs. And they're pretty quick little boogers. When you're bitten by a fiddleback, this is what it looks like. You usually have a central punctum that is red or black. And that is due to coagulated blood. And the punctum itself is less than a millimeter. It's very small. Within hours, within 2 to 3 hours, you usually have the distribution of the venom. And you don't know you've been bitten. Most people do not know they've been bitten by a brown recluse. But very early on, you'll have this erythema, spreading erythema related to it. And it happens, if somebody says they were bitten last night and they come into the office today, it wasn't a brown recluse. You would have been seen last night in the ER if you'd been bitten by a brown recluse. Now again, brown recluse bites, people can be bitten by them and have no issue. But most people, though, who are bitten, they have more issues related to it. Now, if they're cardiovascular, hemodynamically stable, you don't need to do anything to this because there's no antivenom here. There's nothing you can do. You can make sure, you can put them on an antibiotic just to make sure that this is not erysipelas. This is not an infection. But basically, you're just gonna have to wait and see what happens. And these guys, because they like dark spaces, attics and behind the couch, under the couch, those types of places, you really gotta watch out for. Now, so here is a, I'm not sure, so this is a progression. There's a bite on the thumb. That's 5 days afterwards. And this guy, this poor guy, I don't know why it went backwards, but this is on a few days later, and then by a couple of weeks later, it's just produced just a nasty destruction of tissue. And that's why these things are so bad. I've seen these bites on the thigh, you're looking at the femur. I mean, it's a core of necrosis all the way down to the femur. So they go to plastic surgery, wound management for debriding and grafting. So, you know, if somebody came in like this, then I wouldn't wait until you have the necrosis reach the surface. I'd have them shunted on out towards wound care immediately, or send them over to a hand surgeon, especially a hand surgeon here. MRSA is also a thing you got to worry about in terms of the envenomation. Sphingomyelinase D is the enzyme that works here. And the thing about that enzyme, if you look at the evolution of toxins, like snake toxins and other types of toxins, you can follow them through the phyla. And there's a, you can see that these species have developed these toxins evolutionarily through time. It's not true with here. Sphingomyelinase D is unique to this bug. Nowhere else other than certain bacteria. How it went from a single cell organism to this, to the brown recluse, nobody knows. That lesion, though, is very characteristic. If somebody comes in with that ring-like erythema, and you don't see that central punctum with the dark center, it's probably not a brown recluse bite. They are rarely fatal, although they almost uniformly produce impressive tissue destruction. What to do about these things is, how to treat them is always changing, but again, I think referral to plastics or to general surgery or to wound management early on will save you a lot of heartache. Any questions about the environment? One of the things